Well, welcome everyone. This is our afternoon session. My name is Dr. Cathleen Appelt. I'm a sociologist here at Duquesne University, and I'm here with some colleagues from around campus. The four of us are actually faculty members who study stigma and issues of identity, but we do so in really different contexts. And so we thought it would be great to come together and talk with you a little bit about the work that we do, the ways in which we think about stigma, and why we feel it's important to study stigma. And we're going to do that for just a little while, probably about 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to switch gears into an interactive activity. And even you guys on Zoom are going to be able to join in. So what I'm going to do is allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. And why don't we start with Dr. Blaskowitz?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Blaskowitz. My students call me Dr. B just because it's a really long Polish name. I've worked for many years with people with disabilities, especially students and adults with intellectual disability. I think if you were to think about populations that are some of the most stigmatized, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities would definitely fall into one of those populations. And so I'm an occupational therapist trained here at Duquesne. I left and went out and practiced in the field of OT with adults with IDD all over New York City for about 15 years. And then I boomeranged back here to Duquesne again. And since I've been back, a lot of my clinical work and research still centers around people with intellectual disability. I've also worked in policy for New York State. So I've kind of seen like stigma on an individual level, but also on that structural systemic level. I don't know, what else should I say? Oh, we did run one study here with Duquesne students, faculty, and staff, just kind of looking at perceptions of stigma related to students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because we started a pilot program called the Compass program, where students with intellectual disability attend Duquesne. Some of you might have some of our students with ID in your classes, but before we started the program, we kind of wanted to see how receptive the Duquesne community was to having students with intellectual disability on campus. So as we talk, I mean, as it's appropriate, I can always share information from that study.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Dr. Conti?
Oh, hi, my name is Norm. I'm a professor here at Duquesne, the Department of Sociology. My interest in stigma starts way back in the 90s. I was a graduate student at the University of Pittsburgh. If you saw Dee's presentation on her interests, it was a lot like that. I was when it was with police officers. It wasn't returning citizens. It wasn't Marines. Although there were plenty Marines among the police recruits I was studying. And back then, I was interested in the idea of what they call a moral career, which isn't like you become better, but it's or worse. It's about the way your sense of value in people and yourself changes over time as you process through this moral career. And that's all based on the work of a sociologist named Irving Goffman, who sort of brought stigma forward in sociology. And even though there is some stigmatization in the initial police career, I wasn't so focused on that, but moving on, I kept applying this concept of moral career to teacher activists, to career John Weidman, the author, and eventually it did come back to stigma. And I'm happy to be here today and talk to you about that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Hughes. I am a school psychologist and a licensed psychologist and board certified psychology. And that was just the wind. Nothing. No one's angry.
Well, angered. I don't know.
The gods.
I would assume.
We've got the patio door open here.
Sorry about that. We were trying to get some air in here, but to no avail. So my work is with basically disrupting school to prison pipeline. And the area of stigma that is the most salient is for kids who have justice contact, whether they are found guilty or not. is just having any sort of justice contact. So of course, that means an intersection with racism, particularly Black and brown kids, and kids that have disabilities are overrepresented in the school to prison pipeline, as are kids who are LGBTQ are also overrepresented. So if you happen to be all of those things, you're very likely to experience stigmatization, on many, many levels. I too, because I'm involved with the legal system, do a lot of policy work around how to help decision makers understand the impact of stigmatization, particularly around school pushout. And that includes things like disciplinary action, schools pressing charges, so criminal action against children by adults in the building. And at the end of the day, sort of the impact is educational disparities, meaning that our groups that are more stigmatized have less opportunity to learn, and therefore they have basically worse life course outcomes. So they're overrepresented in psychiatric populations, they're overrepresented in school dropout, teen pregnancy, drug use, those sorts of things. And so the impact of stigmatization on children by adults has a significant impact across their whole life. And probably we would all talk about adverse childhood experiences and how that goes on to impact individuals into adulthood. But it is our systems that contribute and allow for stigmatization to not only take root, but also to prosper while everyone around is sort of looking on like dispassionately. So that's my work.
Thank you for sharing that. So again, my name is Dr. Cathleen Appelt. I'm a sociologist, and I have actually run into issues of stigma and identity in two areas of my research. So I worked in, and still do, in research over at the VA Pittsburgh healthcare system for quite some time. And I worked with investigators there who focus on trying to improve behavioral health and general medical healthcare services for individuals with schizophrenia. And it's a group of persons who can be very highly stigmatized. And it really does take a toll on both mental and physical health. And another area in which I run into this is community engaged work focused on maternal and child health in Pittsburgh's local Black communities. There seems to be something about, and we've been talking a lot in this conference overall, right, in the symposium, about intersectional identities, and there seems to be something particularly deadly in our society about being female, African American, and pregnant. And it sort of my quest to understand more about how social inequality gets under the skin of expectations and health. I believe that stigma is one of these vehicles, right, at the micro level. So now I think I'd like to shift just a little bit, guys, and ask you about why it is that you think the study of stigma is important in your discipline or in your subject area, right, your substantive area of work, and a little bit of just how you kind of define it. Like, what does it mean to you? Whoever wants to jump in.
Norm, is this you?
Yeah, I'm honored. I'm not stigmatized. For me, shame, the emotion of shame is some argue it's the master emotion, right? We're always so conscious of avoiding shame that we kind of build these prisons for ourselves in our own ways, in our own, and this is just quote unquote normal people, right? People who aren't dealing with the challenges of the groups that you're concerned with. So for me, what happens is we have, whether it's any of the racism, sexism, homophobia, all those things, right? When we do that to other people, when we look at them that way, when we see them that way, we're really projecting something we're ashamed of about ourselves onto them. So on the one hand, you shouldn't have to be in harm's way because you're a Black pregnant woman, right? Or because you have intellectual disability, or you're a kid who struggled a little bit in school, right? But you are, and it's because the mass of people, the larger group, see it this way. And in that moment, when we stigmatize the other person, we're dehumanizing them, and when we dehumanize someone else, we dehumanize ourselves, right? So for me, that's what makes it, that's what makes it worth focusing my career on. And when you're in prison, or when you're just with these different groups, you can really feel it. And when you have the moments when you get past these things, you feel more free. And I always make that was not even a disclaimer, the obvious thing. I'm a white, I'm categorized as white. I don't think that white exists, but I'm called white. I'm a man, I'm heterosexual, I'm middle class, I'm highly educated, right? I've bounced back and forth between Pittsburgh and Cleveland a few times. I've lived my whole life. So I have every ism in me. Just like racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, that's all in me, because you can't grow up around here in this time. I'm absorbing bad chemicals from the various industries, and I'm socially absorbing bad things too. And I don't know how much I can do to cleanse myself of the chemicals, but I can put in the work to try to understand that I have to, one of my favorite people, a returning citizen named Yusuf Jones, says, I have to see you as another me. And I have to think of we, or else I'm stuck in my own prison. So that's why it's important to me.
Can I just add to what Norm said? Because I think what you're bringing up is very important. One thing that is near and dear to my heart is the institutionalization of stigma. And that I can say that the adults that I work with, teachers, administrators, mental health people alike, believe they are shaming people for their own good, right? So I am going to punish you, humiliate you, otherwise, discipline you, they would say, because we know the right way to be. We know that there's a standard that everybody needs to adhere to. And therefore, it's an act of kindness, my stigmatization of you.
What was that saying back in the day? Have you no shame?
Have you?
Right, I'm
no
gonna
shame?
give you some.
Right, exactly. Let me lend you some of my own. And so for me, the reason that it's important to study is really about shaping the adults and the systems around children that believe they have an obligation to use shame. And now that we've taken away all of their other consequences, right? All the other adults would say, well, you took away all the things we used to be able to do to kids. All I have left is a shaming activity. It's, you're going to be better off for it. And so so Norm, what you said that was so important to me is, of course I have these isms in me because I've been in an environment that where it's prevalent. And a lot of adults misunderstand the environment that they're in, and they believe without any reflection that what they're doing has purpose. And so the reason I think the work is so important is helping the adults to be kinder. I will tell you, as a general rule, the children are very, very kind to each other. It's the adults that sit around and say, this is the right way to be, and this is what you should do, and here's why you should do it. And if you're going to succeed as a fill in the blank, you need to adopt our standards. And so so making the world a more accepting place in sort of in a different way, but with that same kindness that I'm hearing you talk about, I think is really the purpose of the work.
I like what you said too, Tammy, about making the world more accepting, because I feel like as an occupational therapist and a public health person, an educator and psychologist, we're really good at problem solving and finding interventions for communities, populations, you know, but I feel like stigma and marginalization and a lack of acceptance and a lack of embracing of divergence or difference is really like that linchpin. Like I could throw 80 interventions to a community or their parents and their caregivers, but if the broader society isn't willing to accept difference related to people with autism spectrum disorder or Down syndrome, then all those interventions are going to kind of like crumble and fall apart. Or if the structural systems aren't accepting of difference or divergence, then like that's not going to be supportive either. So like, I don't know, I talked to my students in occupational therapy, there's a lot of interventions even here in Pittsburgh, like the Pittsburgh Symphony has started doing, you know, inclusive performances for kids with sensory challenges. That's great. And I think it's great whenever you have an opportunity like that. So that people can be themselves in a space where they feel comfortable. However, like what is taking them away from the mainstream symphony doing for us as a society? How are we embracing the divergence or the difference that people present with if we create separate spaces all the time?
Yeah.
And so I feel like inclusive spaces are the solution, but like we keep creating systems that are separate, you know?
I'm gonna just add one tiny thing, because this is what happens for me in school, is I can do lots of intervention for good kids, but I can't make you like that kid,
Right.
right? So it's not so much like, do I know how to teach them to read? Because I do. But that I have to make an accommodation makes me, it increases the feelings and outward expression of stigma, again, by the adults. And so I totally agree with that. Separation is an act of kindness, but separation for the purpose of separation, right? So let me get you used to what a symphony is like so that we can move you into a regular symphony. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like those old ideas, you know, the things that we did, you know, with race in the US as a society. And we said, oh, we're going to have separate, but equal.
Yeah.
You can have separate, but you know, one thing I've never seen is separate but equal.
Right.
Or separate,
Separate
and
but
equal.
inferior.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it tends to roll. And you know, I think another important thing that came up as I was listening to you guys talk, I think it was something that you said, Megan. You're talking about the structural level and how it is that ideas about people and groups of people, sort of like stereotypes, right, or stigmatized images, can actually become part of a structure. It's very similar to theoretically, right, similar to something like structural or institutional racism, where folks within organizations or institutions develop practices, right, around various groups of people, typically to provide or cater to individuals who are not part of the stigmatized group, right, and others are sort of left out. But these images that we have of individuals who have this sort of stigma, mark of stigma, as Goffman would say, right? A lot of times we're not, you know, really going to bat for those folks, right? And we're not being inclusive because the images that we have of these folks, negative images by and large, actually support doing nothing.
There's been some movement recently. The American Psychological Association just this week put out a apology for their contribution to furthering racism, not only in the research, but also in practices, policies, procedures, and not to get off on critical race theory, but I will say, because that makes schools crazy, we're very crazy about critical race theory right now. But I will say that there has been, you know, a history of looking at institutional practices in different fields, and to the extent that that can be more integrated across fields, across disciplines, the better it is. So the project we did last year, or whenever that was, that looked at decreasing stigmatization of people with mental illness. that had 9 disciplines, right? And we
Mhm.
had to figure out not just how I would teach my students about stigma, but how would I have a conversation with a bunch of folks that weren't in my world or able to discuss with the same background, with the same literature base, the same theoretical basis.
And that's what made it so cool, really.
Yeah, it was very cool. Megan was ahead of that. Award winning, I might add. Award.
Yeah. The students love that sort of interdisciplinary, piece.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like across fields, especially if you're connected to like social justice and destigmatization, like you kind of are speaking a common language, but not using the same words. So that was kind of cool.
Yes. Or using the same words and not meaning the same thing whatsoever.
Yeah, that's so true.
So what do you guys think? Should we switch to an activity now? Or is there anything else, any final words on stigma that we want to share? No?
I mean, the only thing I was gonna say was around the structural level that you're talking about, and just thinking about how like images that we have of people like pervades that level. And I'm thinking like right now, especially for people with disabilities, there's something around like a work requirement. I don't know if you guys have heard this related to Medicaid, but
Oh, yeah.
it's like, people who receive Medicaid are lazy and they're sucking on the system. And these are all the, tropes or whatever appropriate word is that gets put out into the world. And so now there's a work requirement for people, even if they have pretty intense disabilities that really impact their function. And it's gaining movement, it's gaining ground in 9 states where we do it. And there's also like an SSI issue related to like not seeing people with disabilities as being sexual beings who want to be married, who want to have a full life, and we're limiting like coverage or people if they get married, so they won't get as much SSI funds. So it's just like how those are just 2 of many examples of how something on the individual level just like reaches such a mass that it will.
And there's images too, like images of individuals we define socially as needing to be cared for. Right? And we tend to infantilize right, individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities, as well as older adults. Too.
In the legal area, we see, not allowing kids and adults to like consent to sexual activity, for example. Like you're not allowed to consent.
Or be your own guardian, your parent or somebody else has to be appointed as your guardian.
Right.
Because you're incapable of making a decision about your body.
About your body, exactly. But so that goes all the way over into medical as well. So decisions about birth control, for example. And even though we would allow 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds to make such decisions, dropping out of school, it's another one that shows up. We're like, no, actually, you don't have the ability to make that decision. And again, it's where all the adults sort of collude together instead of somebody saying, well, wait, why not? Why doesn't this person get to make the same decisions that all other people this age are making? So competency is a complicated issue, but
I think it's a really powerful way, stigma that is, becomes a really powerful way of othering. With structural consequences, psychological consequences, and really seemingly everything in between. And I'll add one more thing I think before we get into the activity. I think it's a good segue. One of the things that Norm was talking about was how we all sort of have this right within us. I mean, we know this is bad, right? But we've all done it. We've all been there. We've all done this for one reason or another to an individual or a group of individuals, and sometimes it might even be subconscious. As we're doing it, we may not be doing it really so much on purpose. So one of the next things we want to do is just sort of explore that sort of human tendency and its effects. Okay.
So I'm gonna bring you all into prison with me for a minute. And I mentioned the Inside Out program, which is where I started out taking, well, it did it long before me, but the Duquesne started out with me taking students into prison to take classes with the guys there. And on the first day, everyone's very scared. The students are scared for the reasons that you would be scared if you went to into prison. The guys in prison are scared because they're the smartest guys in prison, and now they're taking a college class with quote unquote real college students. Right, so they're self-stigmatizing in that way. So what happens is when almost immediately we start to let go of all that stuff, and you can feel it, it's like magic, really. And as we go through the semester, we break down the whole criminal justice system, and eventually we get to the week on harm. And the week on harm, think about harm in relation to crime, what's harm, how are they related? And we think about our experiences suffering harms and causing harms. And you have to understand that if you're a breathing human being, right, you have rough edges. And if you're close enough to other people, you're going to hurt them if you interact with them long enough. It's just how the world is. And you're also going to get hurt. So we all hurt other people and we all get hurt, right? So this was, obviously more related to crime in that context. And Lori Pompa, the founder of the program who created, she had a student or a teaching assistant, I don't know, who had been raped and did not want to go into the prison and talk about harm and crime and violence. Right. So Lori sat down with this woman and they came up with this activity we're going to do. So the first thing we're going to ask you to do is take a look at a series of questions. I'm asking you to be very quiet during this. I'm asking you not to look at your technology or talk to anyone, or just kind of be in this moment with us.
Screen share.
So I'm just gonna put a link to Poll Everywhere for those who are on Zoom. And you guys can participate virtually as Norm kind of reads off questions.
So I'll read through these questions. If you want to write, I know I said don't use your technology. If you want to take out your phone and write on it, if it's meaningful to you to do that, please don't be afraid. And here's one more thing with stigma, because we use the term treated as less than. We stigmatize the other side of the political spectrum in this country. You gotta remember that, right? So that's how powerful, whichever side you're on right now, we stigmatize the other side. So we're all doing this all the time. It should be easy to think, especially easy when you were young, to think of examples like this, kids in elementary school. Part one, think of a time when you were treated as less than, that is stigmatized by another person or a group. Please jot down for your own responses to the following questions based on your experience. How did it feel when someone treated you as less than, stigmatized you? What impact did that experience have on your life? How did the experience change your way of looking at the world and at yourself? Is there anything now you wish you had done that you didn't do then? What did you lose through this experience? I'm actually dyslexic, so I forgot. So it makes me nervous to read in front of people. That's one of my stigmas. 6, what, if anything, did you gain through the experience? And then part 2 basically asks you similar questions, just on the other side. So I'd like to just be quiet for a few minutes and take a look. Reflect.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Very good. There you go. You've been to church.
Exactly. Sorry. Sorry if I didn't have,
No, no.
I had the wrong hand up.
Yeah. That's the one. That's the one.
The what?
Wine.
Oh, well, later. We're gonna need it.
So if you guys want to write on paper, you can write on paper that Norm handed out in response to this question.
Yeah,
Or
so
for those on Zoom, you guys can just enter into the poll everywhere.
So for the first question, everybody in your piece of paper in the room or on Zoom, if you're on the electron thing. What did you lose when you were treated as less than?
So self-esteem is a common response to this one.
Which one?
I feel like self-esteem is like coming out as the most frequent response to this question. I don't know how to do it on PC.
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
Well, you guys are cheating. I'm gonna stigmatize you for that. So I'm gonna ask you now to take a word out of the basket. And even if it's your word, no one's going to know. This is anonymous. And I'm gonna ask you to read your, when it's time, I'm gonna ask you to share your word with the group. And please give the word the respect it deserves. One. All right, let's start up here. Guys first.
My motivation to grow as a learner and to continue trying. So motivation.
Mine has three things. Do you want all three?
Sure.
Confidence, friends, happiness.
Self-esteem.
Respect.
Self-confidence and feelings of competency.
Opportunities.
Interest in my passion.
Okay, so take that piece of paper you have and crumple it up. So if you haven't already, what did you gain when you were treated as less than? Would you go back to the first one so I can make sure I have it?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Emma.
Good one.
Wait, because I don't want them to see the other
Oh,
people's responses. I
Oh,
know
I didn't go on to the next.
They're
question.
a bunch of cheaters.
So we're on to number 2?
Not yet.
Okay.
Or you can have them do the link if they want, but I don't want it on the board yet.
I can stop sharing.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, for people on Zoom, I'm going on to question number 2.
Yeah, you ultra boy.
Older person.
Sorry. I will bring it up there. Setting up for the-
All right. You want to hear?
Tammy can give us.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
We start. Spite.
Go ahead.
Endurance. Do we want to read some from the Zoom crew? Or,
We'll just write them if everyone can see them.
oh, gotcha, okay.
Challenge, friendship, and growth.
New interest.
Self-empowerment.
Self-loathing.
What's on the board, what's on the screen that I don't have up here? Oh, it's a spite, I'm sure of it.
Independence. Self-motivation, self-empowerment. Need.
I think it was need to prove myself.
Oh.
It got separated, but I saw it when it came in.
Need to prove myself. Anxiety. New purpose.
All right, so crumple those up. Next one word, please. What did you lose when you treated someone else as less than, when you stigmatize someone and they could see it, feel it, taste it?
For those on Zoom, we got question number 3. Same question Norm just stated. Thanks, ma'am.
Did you put one in? You put one in.
Empathy.
Relationships.
Self-respect.
Also respect. Happiness.
Anything from the board that I'm gonna look there?
Kindness. Confidence. Do you have decency? Friendship is up there. Okay. Pride.
All right, take that piece of paper and crumple it up. Last question. What did you gain when you treated someone else as less than? Whatever you want. Give me a number. I'm not gonna shame you.
Down to one.
Let's start in the back.
Popularity.
Dominance, superiority.
Empathy for others who are mean. Temporary power.
Temporary.
Self-loathing.
I got a process answer. Instant gratification, but then guilt and shame.
Social standing.
And from the Zoom,
Temporary gratification. Regret. Was social standing mentioned? Yeah. Regrets, yeah. Disappointment. Dominance. Figure that one out.
All right.
What went with mine? Peace of mind.
Oh,
Peace of mind, I think. I'm interpreting, sorry for anybody on Zoom who didn't mean that. Superiority. Superiority.
Yeah.
Power, sorry. Oh, you got it already.
Okay, I like to put the hash marks. So here's the thing. I don't know how to do this for those of you on Zoom, but for anyone in the room, and actually everyone in the room, I'd like you to, at some point soon, obviously, come grab a marker and draw connections, draw lines between the words. You see that there are no wrong answers. Whatever you see, draw lines between words.
Words that seem associated to us. Maybe.
I'm not giving instructions.
I don't know if I can.
It's good to draw a circle around the word, it helps.
Sorry.
You can do more than one, too, do as many as you want.
People on Zoom can put it in the chat and I can draw it.
Oh, what a great idea. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm for sure. Sorry.
It's a permanent marker.
If you have a dry erase marker or whiteboard, we're recording. Whiteboard marker,
She was so close to tenure.
Stigma. We'll take care of it.
Well, that's nice, thank you.
That's
Excellent work, Kaylee.
It worked already.
Excellent work, Kaylee.
I don't let you get stigmatized for this, Dr.
Yeah.
Press the button.
I had this sort of nightmare we removed that and you see a big map on the class.
No one would believe it was your handwriting. Here we are.
Are we throwing these away or am I holding them for later?
Throw them away. Hey, yeah, don't worry. So, okay, anyone else wants to do more, feel free. Maybe I should go do one.
Yeah, you should go to one.
I don't think you put a word either.
I didn't put a word, but you can't do everything.
I appreciate
I stigmatize myself when you do too much. So the thing for me to do now is ask you what you see. Yes.
Wherever you start on it, you connect to others, like connect to like other areas, like whether you're being stigmatized, it might lead to you stigmatizing others.
Well, the cameras are, as we go back to our couches.
Oh.
Will you repeat that one more time? When we take the couch positions of honor.
You straighten your chair.
It seems like no matter if you start as being stigmatized or being the stigmatizer, you can cross boundaries, switch positions.
There's, like nothing is like necessarily good or bad. Obviously stigmatization is never great, but sometimes good things can be born out of stigmatization. So one of the connections I see is like, what did you lose when you were treated as less than? And we lost all these things, self-esteem, acceptance, confidence. But at the same time, we gained some endurance and we gained some self-empowerment. And then we found like a purpose and a reason to maybe be better, to take action in social justice towards stigmatization or whatever it might be. So like there's a positive side to the even most terribly seeming negative things.
Others?
Seeing like the link between like gaining anxiety and need to prove self and then gaining a peace of mind when you stigmatize others, almost like you're stigmatized, you need to push others down, even thinking about like the popularity and superiority, like that need to push others down so you're not below us.
It's a cycle of bullying that starts early and spreads maybe everywhere. Right? Others.
My panel folks. You see.
Or Zoom folks, I'm not sure if they can see
the problem.
all the connections, but.
You guys see anything you want?
I mean, I agree with that observation that it's like a cycle and that there are probably people that prioritize more sort of my experience and my oppression and your experience and your oppression. And so it's in a circle internal, but then there's also a circle that's dynamically between people, and how something that could happen to you might inadvertently end up negative to somebody else, even though it was, or even if it was positive to you. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm being clear.
Go ahead, Dee.
Another thing I noticed, it's not really with the lines, but when we look at the like, what did you gain when you treated someone else as less than? There are some things in there that are kind of like power and instant gratification, but they're all temporary. And then that makes sense when it's coupled with the guilt and the shame, because like when you go to do something in that moment, maybe it feels like it will give you peace of mind, or you won't be at the bottom any longer, but then that kind of sets in and maybe you think about the times that you were that person, and probably not a great feeling to think about how you treated somebody less than. So all of the
the potential gratification or the positives are really temporary.
Mhm. It's almost like a token economy, right? In some way, it's like sort of this balance of scale, you know. Oh, I feel good. Oh no, I feel bad. Let's make somebody else feel bad. You know, it is sort of back and forth.
For
Trading
me,
stamps.
for me, it's, and this might take us back to why I think this is important to think about. Every single one of us on this planet has something or will have something about our bodies, about our minds and our thoughts, about the groups we might be associated with, about whatever. We all have things that we're told are shameful. And if we can learn how to sort that out and use that as a starting point for building empathy with the groups that we're stigmatizing, that could lead to something, right? If we really got past that, it could really lead to something. And much like the hokey pokey, that's what it's all about.
I didn't know we would have a hokey pokey.
So you another little surprise out of my inside out.
was waiting
Yeah.
for that moment to get out. I just also found it interesting that every single one of us had a response for all 4 questions. So that just means that every single one of us knows what it's like to be stigmatized, what we lost, what we gained, and also, as you said, to be the oppressor, because you mentioned we are all of those things all the time, maybe not intentionally, but we've all had those experiences. And so if we can find empathy in that with each other, it'd be great.
And we're also that to ourselves, right? We're the oppressor and the colonizer of ourselves.
I think I noted what you did, Steve, that empathy was listed almost across the board, and it wasn't listed for the first one, but I would think, what did you lose when you were treated as less than? You probably are more empathic to someone else if you remember being bullied yourself, or so I don't know where I was going with that, but I guess there are some silver linings, or I don't know, to having done something yourself that you are guilty about it. And I'm thinking to some of the systemic racism trainings that I've attended lately, especially here on campus. Some information is great, some is not so great, but you know, like our trainer, Norm, you're in that with me.
I'm smiling a lot.
Under this mask, but she'll say, like, you know, 95% of people she feels have, she's done these across the US, I guess, and she said that like 95% of people she feels have some empathy or some kindness in them to want to do better, but there's only very few people that are truly like mean to be
Like,
mean.
Psychopath, sociopath, and we have to have empathy for them, right?
Right.
Because they're broken.
Yeah, I think the usefulness of an exercise like this one is the unpacking of that, right? So the thing that's immediately salient to you is going to be what you get, right? And kind of what you lost, you might disregard or, you know, otherwise attend very little to. And that you got something from being mean to somebody else is, you know, that takes a level of 1, insight, and 2, you know, courage to say out loud. The other thing I'll say about this exercise that I like, just in case you're wondering, Norm, is being able to say somebody else's words, which gives you, gives the words more power, and also gives you more space, a little more distance with your own words. So maybe some more freedom to be honest rather than to say, here's what I got. It's just a kind of floating in the world. So I think it promotes honesty very nicely.
And the whole thing that Norm said, right, about how we're the colonizers and the oppressors, right, of ourselves, you know. I don't know about you guys, but when I was, you know, writing down the stuff on my little slips of paper, I'm thinking, man, I'm kind of a jerk, right? And then, you know, when I put it in the bucket and then took somebody else's out and read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone, right? You know? Everybody else is kind of a jerk too, right? And when you're putting this up there, I don't know. I think it has a way of sort of connecting us to our humanity and, you know, with one another. And if we're able to find 20 people, right, across the folks sitting in here and up on Zoom, willing to take an hour and a half out of their Tuesday afternoon, when it's beautiful outside, I might add, to do this, you know, that's my silver lining, right? I think there's hope.
Yeah.
I think there's hope.
Tell us how the guys respond.
Just like this. And this is people who have killed other people. Right? And this is people who were in wars, right? When it's police recruits, and maybe the guys in prison too. We did in the structural racism Zoom thing we're doing, we did a thing from this, like, and it used it inside out. It's not original to inside out, but it was so funny to me to watch all the faculty here respond to this exactly the same way that the young cops and these guys in prison do. So I think the beauty of it is it's the same words. And I don't do it with stigma there. I probably will at some point now, but we do it with harm, and the words aren't that different, you know, because being in prison, incarcerated, is so stigmatic, right? And you know.
Anybody have any questions or thoughts?
Mike on Zoom says the same good can come from initial point reactions.
That's Mike Hollick, you know him.
Hi, Mike.
Sustained good can come from initial poor reaction. Sounds like a hopeful statement.
So here, I got something for you. Watch this.
I'm not sure where I wrote on the wall.
Look, only a minor blemish of the cell. Here's what I want you to do. You have your, you still have your little slip of paper. Let's read up here.
Are we lighting a fire in the
Yeah,
company?
Put them away. Okay, so if you have them, we put them here. You take all this right here. Do this. And we'll throw it in that garbage can. You don't have to carry this stuff around with you anymore.
Oh, that's a good idea.
We do that in therapy too, by the
Do
way.
you really?
Yeah.
Well, I need help, so good.
Fire makes it more cathartic.
Yeah.
Well, what it does is for kids, we can leave it there, right? So it's like, we'll come back. I'm not gonna forget your problem, but we're gonna contain it here. And you can go to class or back into the world or what have you, and when it's time to revisit this. So it's a very physical way of showing that we're not gonna,
Yeah.
forget something that's important to them. And then sometimes when we're done, then we get rid of it, because now it's over.
And speaking of things being over,
Yeah, if there are no further comments or questions, I think this was a good afternoon. I really enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for stepping in and sharing the day with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to you, Steve, and Sydney for organizing. Thank you. Great week.